Hello, Essentials. Glad to be back. We are on week 21, and I will be doing the grammar EEL portion this week. We had a lot of review last week, but this week we'll actually be introducing some pretty new stuff. Now, some of this stuff is a little bit challenging. Some of it is just actually introducing the last piece of our puzzle, Chart A, our Chart A puzzle, which is pretty exciting. That means we have learned all the basics after today. But the stuff that's a little bit more challenging, especially for you first years, I just want you to listen, absorb, and don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. In fact, the guide says, and I hope all you parents are reading the guide this week because it is a pretty big week. The guide says that if you are a first year, you might want to just choose to go back and review the first 20 weeks. And just kind of call it a day as far as doing too much with some of the things we're going to be introducing, more complicated things we'll be introducing these last couple weeks. So, all that to say, let's get started. Let's do a little bit of a review before we get started with my castles back here, really well-drawn castles. Not really. All right, can you guys see that? It's a bit of a challenge to get a setup here. Woo, okay, I hope you can see that, but I have a few sentences here to review some things that we already know. So let's look at our Chart A. If you can get your Chart A out and have it in front of you. If you need to pause, you may pause now and get your Chart A. I would also like you to have your folder out because there are a few more charts we need to look at in that folder. And then, get a pencil and paper or a whiteboard if you prefer, and you can kind of do this along with me. All right? Okay. The first thing I want to point out is that you know a lot. You know a lot, even if you're a first year, because you pretty much after today, like I said, are going to know everything on Chart A. So, first of all, I need my helpers in the back. Helpers in the back. Why don't you sit right here? You don't have to get in camera, but you can sit right here. I want you to help me sing through some of the things that we know. All right, so for instance, we know the 8 parts of speech, and I know Miss Porter, I'm pretty sure, sang those last week. All right, ready? 8 parts of speech. 8 parts of speech. Come on, Lily.
Noun, pronoun, verb, adverb, conjunction, interjection, preposition, adjective.
Very good. You know all of the 8 parts of speech. Now, let's figure out what else you know. Look down here at this box, the 5 parts of a sentence. Girls, what are the 5 parts of a sentence? We first need a subject. Then we need a
verb.
So we need something, that is doing something, right? A subject of the sentence. And we need a verb, something that's being said about the subject, right? So what about our punctuation, girls? What do we need? Capital letter. They always remember their capital letters, right, girls?
Yeah.
And an end mark. Okay, very good. And what does it have to have that just kind of puts it all together? It needs to make complete sense, okay? So we can't have a thought hanging like we do with some of our subordinate dependent clauses that we'll talk about later. Okay, so we know all the parts of the sentence, we know all the 8 parts of speech, and we know most of this here. So we know the 4 purposes of a sentence. We know that some sentences are declarative, and they make a statement, right? They just declare something. We know that
some are exclamatory,
and they are saying something in a really excited voice. Like that. All right. Or maybe you're just scared and you're yelling, I don't know. But they're exclaiming, your voice goes up, and we have an exclamation mark at the end. And some sentences, the purpose of a sentence is to be interrogative. They want to interrogate people and ask a lot of questions. Okay, so we have a question mark at the end, and our voice usually goes up too. Did you clean your room? Okay. Now, imperative, what is the purpose of an imperative sentence? It's to make a, come on, Lily, command. I'm going to embarrass her on purpose so that she answers my questions. An imperative sentence makes a command. Clean your room, right? Do you ever hear that? All right, it can have a period or an exclamation mark at the end. So you know all of those. You know declarative, exclamatory, interrogative, imperative, the 4 purposes of a sentence. Chart A. You also know 7 patterns. And I need some help with the 7 patterns here. All right, because we just need some help with the little clapping here. Ready? We have SBI, SBTDO, SBLPN, SBLPA, SVTIODO, SVTDOOCN, SVTDOOCA. Huh! Okay, there we go. I thought Miss Porter did a fabulous job with the huh at the end. Okay, now we also know some of the structures. Okay, the structure means if you're building a house, right, you have your foundation, you have your walls, things like that. You're kind of the structure, the bones of it, right? So we know about simple sentences, we know about compound sentences and complex sentences, but there's one over here that we don't know anything about yet. But we're going to be talking about that today. So I'm going to review the first 3 structures here on the board. So number 1, we have the kings reigned. That is a simple sentence, all right? The definition of a simple sentence is that it has to have one independent clause, and it has to express a complete thought. So an independent clause means it has a subject and a verb, which this one does, and expresses a complete thought. The kings reigned. We understand that, right? It's a complete thought. Now, the second structure is compound. The kings reigned, which was my one complete thought, right? My one simple sentence, and they fought. That is a compound sentence. And a compound sentence has at least 2 independent clauses joined by a, who knows what this is? It's and, right? It's a coordinating conjunction. Another word for a coordinating conjunction is, I don't know if you can see this right here on my chart. It's a fanboy. It's a fanboy. So I'm going to circle it because that tells us this is compound. It's one independent clause, the kings reigned, complete thought. They fought, complete thought, that can stand alone. And both of these independent clauses are joined by a fanboy. And we could say the kings reigned, yet they fought, right? We could say the kings reigned or they fought, something like that. So we could put other coordinating conjunctions in there. And then we have complex sentences. And I don't know if you see on your chart, it's www, or who, which. So those 2 things tell you something very important. My 2 examples here are the kings who were enemies fought. Now what's my independent clause here? You can pause if you want to think about it. My independent clause is the kings fought. Can the sentence, the kings fought, stand alone? Does it have a subject and a verb and make complete sense? Yes. It fits all of those things. So we have these other words here, who were enemies, which isn't a complete thought. Who were enemies, right? It's not a complete thought. And we need to figure out what it is. Well, we see this right here. We see a who, because we know from our IEW, a who, which clause is just another name for an adjectival subordinate clause. Those are big words. I know Miss Porter talked about that last week. But who were enemies begins with something called a relative pronoun, which we're going to talk about in just a minute again, just to review. But this is basically just a who, which clause, and we know it's adjectival. The whole clause is adjectival. It kind of basically functions like its own part of speech, like an adjective. All of those words together function like an adjective, we know that it modifies kings. Which kings? It asks an adjective question as well. Which kings? The kings who were enemies. So we know this is a complex sentence because it has one independent clause. The definition is it has a one independent clause and at least one subordinate clause. So this is my subordinate clause. The reason it's subordinate or dependent is another word for a synonym for subordinate is because it can't stand alone. It's not a complete thought, like we said before. Who were enemies is not a complete thought. So we have one independent clause and we have at least one subordinate clause. In this case, it's an adjectival subordinate clause because it answers the question which king and modifies a noun. Okay? Now, we have another example of a complex sentence. So this is just review. The kings fought since they were prideful. Okay, so let's find our independent clause. You may pause it if you need to. The kings fought. The kings fought. That is our independent clause. Can it stand alone? Does it have a subject and a verb? Does it make complete sense? The kings fought. Yep, it does. So it is our independent clause. Now, I see a word that you might recognize here. If I see your brains working and you see a word that you recognize and you're thinking, what is that word that tells me what the rest of those words are? What is it? Oh, I have a student down here that's telling me.
Asia love.
It's this word, since. Okay? Now, can the words, since they were prideful, is that a complete thought? No. It's just adding extra information to my independent clause. So what's my definition of a complex sentence again? Well, it is one independent clause and at least one subordinate clause. Now, in this case, this subordinate clause is not adjectival. It's not acting like an adjective. It's acting like another part of speech. Think about, I've already told you over there in the notes, but what part of speech do you think it's acting like? It's acting like an adverb because, for two reasons. It begins with an Asia wub, an Asia, right here, Asia wub, right here on complex, okay? What are our Asia wubs? When, while, where, as, since, if, although, whereas, unless, because. Those are our Asia wubs, and since is one of my Asia wubs. And because it's at the beginning of this clause, and we know this clause is dependent or subordinate, it depends on this independent clause to make sense, we know that this is an adverbial subordinate clause. It acts, basically, these words act like one part of speech. Since they were prideful is acting like an adjective. So it's an adverbial subordinate clause. It also answers the questions, the kings fought why? And we know that why is an adverb question. If you look at your adverb chart, why did they fight? It's modifying this verb fought, and it's answering the question why. So that tells us that it's an adverb. Okay, so we have simple sentence, we have compound sentence, and we have two examples of complex sentences. One is an adjectival complex sentence, and one is, a complex sentence with an adjectival subordinate clause, and we have a complex sentence as an example with an adverbial subordinate clause. Got it? Okay, now I'm going to tell you a little story, and this might seem kind of silly, but hopefully it'll help, or at least provide entertainment for just a little bit. Okay, so I think I got this story from Mrs. Diggs. If any of you had Mrs. Diggs, I don't know if she made it up or if she got it from someone else, but it gives us just a little picture. I hope you can see my lovely drawings here. Not an artist. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a king. Here's Mr. King. Okay, there he is. There's Mr. King. All right. In fact, there were two kings who were twin brothers of all things. One was named King Independent, and one was named King Autonomous. If you don't know what autonomous means, pause the video and ask your teacher. But basically, It means the same thing as independent. All by themselves, okay? He was by himself and he was by himself. Very independent and autonomous. Now, they didn't like each other very much, which is unfortunate. But if you notice, their simple castles were right next to each other and very similar. In fact, they even had windows in the same place. Kind of crazy. They had the same architect. So their two kingdoms feuded, argued, fought, feuded nonstop over just about everything. But one hot, steamy summer evening, King Independent and King Autonomous were both at their windows catching a breeze. Now, at first they pretended not to notice each other. You know how you do this? Kind of like that. Well, because they were very independent. But one glance led to another, and soon they started chatting. And they realizing they had quite a bit in common. I mean, they were twins after all. So, among other things, they both had designed their castles with windows on either side to allow fresh, cool air to circulate on those hot summer medieval nights. They suddenly became the best of friends. They decided that they no longer wanted to live in their own simple castles, but rather they wanted to join their two castles to make a compound castle. Okay, so their masons worked all night long so that the next day there was a connecting tunnel between the two castles. They certainly had to knock out their windows to make that happen. You can imagine, right? So they had to get rid of those windows. Uh-oh, I can see trouble coming. So that the tunnel could be put into place. But that was no matter because they could talk through the tunnel. There was joy throughout both castles as now all the servants, knights, and squires could all easily walk through the tunnel to see all of their newfound friends. But there was one problem. As the hot summer sun rose in the morning sky, everyone in the compound kingdom soon realized that by joining their walls, they each had gotten rid of a window that allowed the breeze to flow through. Just imagine what that might be like. Both castles were full of cranky squires, knights, and certainly two cranky kings. The compound castle almost broke up. Suddenly, in the middle of a heated argument between the two steamy, cranky kings, one brother said to the other, "Why, we can't have a compound castle without some boys to fan us." Since there was no more fighting between the two castles, the knights were out of work anyway. So, the noble knights assumed the all-important role of being fanboys so that the compound castle could remain. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So, joy was restored throughout the whole compound kingdom. But the story doesn't end there. Now we have a compound castle again with our fanboys. But King Independent's wife gave birth to a baby girl, a youthful, beautiful princess. They lovingly named her Asia Wubb. Like all babies, Princess Asia Wubb was completely dependent on her dad to take care of her. He wanted to build her a tall tower on top of his castle. The kings had to use all the extra stones in the castle for the tunnel construction. Luckily, there were big stones strewn all over the kingdom. King Independent needed our help in collecting them and delivering them, so we have them for the huge tower. All right, let's go ahead and place those bricks. Now, King Independent, like most dads, the king wanted everyone in the compound castle and kingdom to know about his new princess. So first, we're going to build the tower. When while, where, as, no, keep going up, since, if, although, whereas. Anybody recognize these, by the way? That's right. There are www Asia Wubs. Unless and because. So there's our tower built on top of the castle. Now, like most dads, he wanted everybody to know about his baby girl, Asia Wub. So since Asia Wub was too young to wear a proper crown and too young to parade around the kingdom in a royal dress, the king decided that he would order his blacksmith to fashion the largest, most gorgeous golden crown to be placed atop Princess Asia Wub's royal tower. And it had to have a design across to show who she was. So it says Asia Wub. Now, it was done. What was even more spectacular is that everyone in the kingdom would know about the new princess because they could easily see this was for Asia Wub. Now, since every tale has a lesson or two, here are the lessons learned. You can't have a compound castle without your fanboys. And you certainly can't have a dependent baby princess without a proper crown. In this case, it's a www Asia B designed crown. Now, how can I get away with telling this medieval tale during English grammar class and not get fired? Well, a compound sentence is at least two independent clauses connected by a coordinating conjunction, which we also refer to as fanboys, and at least one subordinate clause, okay? It starts with a www Asia B or a who which. Now, if I look in my thesaurus, as I said before, dependent is the same thing as subordinate. So basically, my definition of a compound sentence is at least two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction and at least one subordinate clause. Okay? All right. So there's my story. Stick into it.
Do you want me to start taking stuff?
You can actually move that. And then we're going to move on.
Put it where?
And I created a sentence to illustrate this. Okay, so we have the kings reigned and they reconciled because they were brothers. So let me walk you through this real quickly and then we'll diagram it. We'll see if it's truly compound complex. All right, we have, well, first let's see if we can find our independent clauses, okay? I see one here, I think. Get my black marker. The kings reigned, and I see they reconciled, and I see a because. So I'm kind of just looking at it, giving an overview, but I want to go through my question confirmation. So first I want to look at my first independent clause, and I want to say, and this also gives me a clue as well, this coordinating conjunction. So who reigned? Kings, subject, noun. What is being said about kings? Kings reigned, verb. And I have nothing after that independent clause, so I'm going to have a verb intransitive. All right, which kings? The kings, that's my article adjective. I have my coordinating conjunction and with my comma before it. We want to always put a comma before it. And then I have they reconciled. So who reconciled? Well, first I want to point out that this is one pattern, a SVI pattern for that independent clause. And I'm connecting with a coordinating conjunction. That's an independent clause, coordinating conjunction, and then I have another independent clause here. I'm going to ask my questions about this independent clause because every one of these clauses can have a different pattern. So who reconciled? They reconciled. That's a subject pronoun. What is being said about they? They reconciled. Verb. And it's going to be a VI because there's no words after that, because I have something else over here. I have a because. And I know that this because is a subordinating conjunction because I memorized my www at Asia Wubs. And that's my buh at the end. And that is a clause. So the kings reigned, independent clause. It makes sense on its own. It has a subject and a verb. They reconciled, independent clause. Makes sense on its own. Has a subject and a verb. Connected by a coordinating conjunction. If that was by itself, it would just be a compound sentence. But I have something else over here, okay? I have because they were brothers, which can't stand alone, doesn't make sense on its own, so it must be a subordinate clause. Now let's see what pattern that subordinate clause has. They were brothers. Who were brothers? They, subject pronoun. What is being said about they? They were, and they were who? They were brothers. Can brothers replace or describe they? It can. So that must be a predicate nominative, which makes the verb linking. Okay, so according to my definition of a compound complex sentence, which, as I pointed out, is my last structure here, I have to have at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 subordinate clause. So in this case, I do. That's exactly what I have. 2 independent clauses and 1 subordinate clause. So it is a compound complex sentence. I want you to notice that every single clause, which we know from our class that a clause has to have a subject and a verb. It can sometimes be independent and make sense on its own, and it can sometimes be dependent and need some more information to make it independent or add something to the independent clause. So in this case, every single clause, whether they're independent or dependent, can have their own pattern. So the pattern for the first independent clause is SVI. The pattern, which is right here, the pattern for the second independent clause is SVI, same one. And the pattern for my dependent clause is SVLPN, right here. And what kind of clause is this? Well, when I see my Asia B word, my because, that gives me a clue that it's probably an adverbial subordinate clause. And it answers the question, the kings reigned and they reconciled. Why? Why? That's an adverbial question. If you memorize your adverb questions. My adverb questions are how, when, where, why, how often, how much, to what extent. So if it's answering the question why and it begins with a subordinating conjunction, a www Asia wub, we know this must be an adverbial clause. All right? So there's my compound complex. You know everything on your chart A now. Give yourselves a hand. Way to go. All right, a few more things still to go over. We need to talk through chart P, okay? That is this chart. It is in your folder. This is our compound complex structure chart. Go ahead and get that out. You may pause it if you need to while you get it out. It's in your folder. Okay, after you have this out, I need you to have either a dry erase marker if it's in a sleeve like this, or just a pencil, and you can mark on it. It's fine. What I want you to do at home with your teacher is we are going to first go through and look at it together. Okay, for each of these kinds of charts, we have boxes, okay? And each box is a different purpose. So we have declarative sentences here, exclamatory sentences here, and you can look at the punctuation to give you a clue. And we have interrogative sentences here. These all ask questions, and we have our imperative sentences, our commands. So what I want to look at is our declarative sentences very quickly. And you'll notice the great thing about this chart is now that you've learned compound complex, every single one of these sentences is in compound complex form. And we're going to look at two in particular. We're going to look at declarative and we're going to look at imperative, which is our command. But first, let's look at declarative. I want you to look at the first sentence. Jesus, who laughed, wept, yet he sang. Well, what did we say that a complex sentence needs to have? It has to have at least two independent clauses and at least one subordinate clause. That subordinate clause can be either adjectival or adverbial. So the first thing I want you to do is, and if you need to pause after you do this, I want you to go through each of these sentences and I want you to underline the independent clauses, both of them. You may underline them both in the same color, or you may underline them in different colors. But underline both of the independent clauses. For instance, on the first sentence, you would underline Jesus wept, and then you would also underline the other independent clause, which is he sang. So that's the first thing I want you to do. Pause it just in the first box, just for the declarative purpose. Go through and underline both of the independent clauses. Okay, pause the video if you need to. Okay. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to box your coordinating conjunction. What is a coordinating conjunction? Remember, it is our fanboys, okay? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. I want you to put a box around your fanboy, okay? Go ahead and do that and then pause the video. All right, then I want you to circle either your relative pronoun, if you think it's a adjectival subordinate clause, or I want you to circle your subordinating conjunction, if it's an adverbial clause. I believe each of these is going to be adjectival, so it's going to start with a who. All right, so I want you to go through and circle all those who's, because they are the beginning of your subordinate or dependent clause that can't stand alone. All right, pause the video and do that. Okay, so next you're going to go down to this compound complex imperative box, and we're going to do the same thing in this box. First, underline all of the independent clauses, and then and like I said, you can do them in the same color or different colors. Underline the independent clauses, box your coordinating conjunction that is joining those two independent clauses, and then I want you to circle your relative pronoun if they're here, or it looks like in a lot of these or all of these, you're going to have a subordinating conjunction, a www Asia Web to circle. What I want you to see with this is I want you to see the different parts. I want you to see the independent clauses joined together with a coordinating conjunction, and then I want you to see what words begin those subordinate clauses, okay, and see how you make a complex sentence. So go ahead and pause, and you can do all of those things at the same time with your teacher. Okay, so you can do that with the other boxes if you would like. It's a good practice, or you can copy the chart, whatever you want to do, but just make them familiar with this. Okay, next we have our conjunction chart H, which should be in your trivium tables. All right, your grammar trivium tables. It is chart right here, this kind of orangey yellow. I don't know if I have mine labeled correctly, so I don't want to tell you a letter. All right, so just as a review, and I want you to copy this week, and your teacher can give you bonus, your tutor can give you bonus tickets for whatever we're going to copy, or whatever we will give you for copying this. But very first one we have is coordinating. And a conjunction, as a definition, just as a review, is a word used to connect words, phrases, or clauses together. They don't just have to connect clauses. They can also connect words, they can connect phrases. And I'll show you that in just a second. But coordinating conjunctions are my fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Subordinating conjunctions are my Asia wubs, my when, while, where, as, since, if, although, where, as, unless, because. Those begin those dependent or subordinate clauses that are usually adverbial. And just to point out here too, there are some multi-word subordinating conjunctions as well. These are extra ones you may not have noticed. These are the main ones, but they can also be joined. These are also subordinating conjunctions. And then correlative conjunctions, they are either or, neither nor. Just want to make you familiar with that. Neither Tom nor Sue did their homework. Neither one of them. So those would be neither nor would be my correlative conjunctions, and they always come in pairs. And then I have my relative pronouns, which we talked about, my who, which, as well as that or whom. You might see those sometimes in sentences. So the one we see most often is a who, which, our IEW who, which clause, which adds more information to our noun or pronoun. And then we have some pretty cool ones down here called conjunctive adverbs. So have you ever wondered what the word however is, or furthermore, when you sound fancy in your papers, or consequently, you want to sound really, fancy and snooty in your papers? Well, I used to always wonder what part of speech that was. Well, they're actually conjunctive adverbs. So there they are. I would look through those together. So that is your chart so that you know what all these things are and are familiar with these things, these words that I'm using. All right, then we have a new sentence here. I'm going to use, why not use some red, I guess, if this works well. Just as a little practice, we have an example. I don't know if did it rain in your area today? Because it definitely rained here. The rain falls, okay? That is a simple sentence, okay? It's an SVI, okay, and it just is one independent clause that expresses a complete thought. Okay, now, I might even add, if you want to play around, I might just add a prepositional phrase, which I think Miss Porter talked about that last week, my prepositions, bye-bye at 2 to 2, okay? So I might want to say the rain falls in March, okay? In is my preposition that I memorize, and March is my object of the preposition, my noun that follows my preposition. In what? In March. All right, so this is my prepositional phrase. My sentence, though, is still a simple sentence because that prepositional phrase is just added on. It's still simple and it is an SVI, okay? So now I have the rain falls in March. I want to make it compound, so I have to add a fanboy. The rain falls in March, and that's one of my fanboys, right? And the flowers bloom. All right, so I have an independent clause, the rain falls in March, and the rain falls is what really the independent clause. And then I have my coordinating conjunction, my fanboy, and I have flowers bloom. I have another independent clause. So I have two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. That's my compound sentence. Now, I want to make it, I'm not going to make it complex because we've already added our two on. So I want to make it compound complex. So all I have to do, I already have two independent clauses. I just want to add a subordinate clause to it. Okay, maybe I want to answer the question, why? Or I want to answer the question, to what extent? Or I might want to say, the rain, which I love, falls in March, or the flowers, which are beautiful, bloom. But I think I want to answer the question, when. So when does the rain falls in March and the flowers bloom? When do they like to bloom? Because when the rain hits them, they kind of wither a little bit. So the flowers bloom when the sun shines, okay? So I see my when, which is my subordinating conjunction from my conjunction chart, when, okay? And it doesn't make sense on its own. When the sun shines, it's not a complete thought. So I just added it to the end of my compound sentence to make a compound complex sentence. And I know it's compound complex because it has at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 subordinate clause, when the sun shines. Okay? All right, now, a couple other little things. This is where it gets a little bit tricky and fun, all right? The next few weeks, we are going to be talking about this crazy little chart right here. It is chart Q. Q is kind of a crazy letter, so it helps us remember our crazy chart. These things, these parts of speech we're talking about, are called verbals. All right, they're those parts of speech that you probably have thought, I really don't know what part of speech that is, and I'm not really sure how to diagram that. Happens all the time. This week, we're going to be talking about infinitives. Sorry, infinitive is a type of verbal. Infinitives this week. Next week, I believe we'll talk about gerunds and then participles, okay? So just to review, a verbal is a verb that is used as another part of speech. So when you hear the word verbal, it's not a verb, it's not acting like a verb, but it does have a verb. It's made up of a verb, if that makes sense. A verb is part of it, but it's just using a verb to do something else. So it's basically a verb with something added to it, and it's used as another part of speech. Remember how we talked about different jobs and certain words could be different things? So a noun could act like an adjective, right? The dog house. What kind of house? The dog house. Well, dog is a noun, but dog is acting like an adjective telling which kind of house, right? That's actually more of a compound. But there are lots of examples of things like that where parts of speech don't act like themselves. So a verbal is a verb that is used as another part of speech. Now, if you remember, I told you we were going to have a lot of charts today. If you remember our verb chart, I want you to look at all these as we're doing. I want you to know where everything is, okay? So you can find all of this stuff. All right, so we have 2 verb charts in our trivium table. We have our regular old verb chart that tells us about all the different kinds of verbs and their attributes and our time, our tenses and that kind of thing, which is really important for Latin. But over here on our chart D, at the very tip top, see what it says? Principal parts of verbs. Do you see the word right here? Infinitive. See the word right here? Infinitive. So, you already know what an infinitive is. It's just one of your 5 principal parts of a verb. You have infinitive, which is to plus your verb. In this case, the verb is play on the example. So to play is my infinitive form of that verb, okay? You also have the present form, which is happening now, plays, the past, played, present participle, playing, and then past participle, played. So in this case, we're talking about our first principal part, which is our infinitive to plus the verb play. All right, to play. So you can put to with any verb: to run, to fly, to sing, and it's the infinitive form of the verb. We consider that the base form of the verb, okay? It's in its basest form, all right? So if we're going to use our infinitive, which now we know is to plus a verb used as a noun, adjective, or adverb, I believe that's in your memory work. To plus a verb used as a noun, adjective, or adverb. Here is the definition. We know that the words together, to plus a verb, can be used as different parts of speech. All right?